The receipt lit up his phone at 6:23 a.m. $37.84. Brennan Ashford stared at the screen, standing barefoot in his penthouse kitchen, the city of Boston still dark beyond 12-foot windows. For a moment, he thought the banking app had glitched. He refreshed it once, then again. The number didn't change. CVS Pharmacy, Downtown Crossing. That wasn't food. It wasn't a hotel. It wasn't a ride. It was small, careful, ordinary. And somehow it unsettled him more than if the charge had been $10,000. His coffee sat untouched on the counter, cold, forgotten. He hadn't slept at all, because 12 hours earlier, Brennan Ashford had done something he had spent his entire life believing only foolish people did. He had trusted a stranger. What he didn't realize yet was that this single transaction was already unraveling everything he thought he knew about people and about himself. Only the morning before, Brennan had been moving through Back Bay Station like the world bent around him. He was 37 years old, CEO of Ashford Global Industries, a pharmaceutical empire valued at over $11 billion. His name alone carried weight. Doors opened faster. Voices softened when he entered a room. He wore an Italian wool coat worth more than most people's monthly rent. His leather briefcase held contracts with more zeros than he ever bothered to count. His phone buzzed nonstop with messages from investors, attorneys, and board members demanding pieces of his attention. His assistant walked 3 steps behind him, reciting the day's schedule. Emergency board meeting, legal call, investor briefing. He was late. Then he saw her. She sat against the cold subway tile near the Orange Line entrance, shoulders hunched, trying to shield herself from the January wind that slipped through the station. A little girl slept curled in her lap, wrapped in a donated coat that was clearly too big. The child's cheek rested against her mother's chest, trusting, unaware. Beside them lay a piece of cardboard. Single mother, lost our home. Anything helps. Brennan stopped walking. His assistant nearly collided with his back. "Mr. Ashford," she said sharply, "we really don't have time." "Wait," he said. The word came out quiet, distant. He didn't know why he'd stopped. He passed people like this every day. Poverty was everywhere. It was a statistic, a policy discussion, something handled through donations approved by lawyers and filtered for tax efficiency. But something about this woman froze him in place. She looked up when she sensed him there. There was no performance in her eyes, no exaggerated sadness, no practiced plea. Just exhaustion. "I'm sorry," she said immediately, her voice rough from cold. "We're not bothering anyone. We can move." She was apologizing for existing. That hit Brennan harder than any hostile takeover ever had. "How long have you been out here?" he asked. Sutton hesitated. Her eyes flicked away for half a second. 5 months. 5 months. A 6-year-old child sleeping on subway floors while thousands of people walked past every day. His assistant shifted behind him, tense. "Mr. Ashford, the board." He raised a hand without turning around. His father's voice rose uninvited in his mind, sharp and familiar. "Trust is a currency fools spend freely. Desperation makes thieves of everyone." Brennan reached into his wallet. Sutton's eyes flicked down, probably expecting a few bills, $20, maybe 50. Instead, he pulled out a black credit card, platinum edges, raised numbers, no spending limit. He held it out. "Take it." Sutton stared at the card like it might explode. "I don't understand. This has to be a joke." "It's yours for 24 hours. No limits, no conditions." Her hands shook. "People don't do this. Not to people like me." "I want to see something," he said. And for the first time in years, he meant exactly what he said. "I want to see what someone with nothing does when given everything." Slowly, like someone touching fire, Sutton closed her fingers around the card. "Why?" she whispered. Brennan looked at Indy, sleeping peacefully despite the cold, despite the noise, despite the instability of her entire world. He thought of his own childhood, private schools, warm beds, needs met before he ever learned to ask. "Because I'm tired of assumptions," he said. "Because I want to know if what I was taught is actually true." He stood up. "I'll come back tomorrow morning, same place, same time." As he walked away, doubt chased him. His father's voice was relentless. "She'll drain it. She'll disappear. You're a fool." But beneath that voice was another, quieter one. What if she doesn't? That night, Brennan stood alone in his penthouse hall, staring out at the glittering skyline. The space felt cavernous, empty. He opened his banking app again and again. Nothing. Midnight passed. 1 a.m. 2. Why wasn't she spending? Was she afraid or waiting? Then, at 6:23 a.m., his phone buzzed. Transaction, $37.84. And in that moment, Brennan Ashford felt something unfamiliar tighten in his chest. Anticipation. Because whatever she was doing, it wasn't what he expected. And he suddenly realized the test he thought he'd designed for her might not be about her at all. The phone buzzed again before Brennan could lock the screen. Another notification. $52.19. Target, South Bay. He sat down on the edge of his bed, suddenly aware that his heart was beating faster than it ever did during board meetings or hostile negotiations. These weren't impulse purchases. They weren't reckless. They felt planned. Then another charge appeared. $2,863. Duncan. That one made him freeze. Not because of the amount, but because it didn't make sense. No one spends nearly $3,000 at Dunkin' Donuts unless something very specific is happening. Bulk orders, gift cards, supplies. It wasn't indulgence, it was intention. Brennan exhaled slowly. For the first time since the night before, he realized he was nervous. He checked the time. 8:11 a.m. His assistant called again. He let it ring, then called his driver instead. "Cancel everything today," he said when she finally reached him, panic edging her voice. "All meetings. Reschedule whatever you can." "Mr. Ashford, the investors—" "I don't care," he said, and to his own surprise, he meant it. 20 minutes later, he was in the back seat of his car, coat pulled tight, watching Boston slide past the window. 3 blocks from Back Bay Station, he told the driver to stop. "I'll walk from here." The cold hit him immediately. Sharp, honest, the kind of cold you can't escape with money. As he approached the Orange Line entrance, his pace slowed. She was still there. Same spot, same wall, but everything else was different. Indy was awake now, sitting upright beside her mother. She wore a brand new purple winter coat with a fur-lined hood, waterproof boots. Her hair had been brushed and clipped back with a small butterfly barrette. In her arms was a stuffed elephant, gray and soft, clutched like it was precious. Sutton saw Brennan first. She stood up so quickly the card nearly slipped from her hand. "I was coming to give it back," she said fast, breathless. "I promise. I just needed to get a few things first." Her voice cracked, panic surfacing as if she expected sirens, security, consequences. Brennan raised both hands. "It's okay. You still have time." Her shoulders dropped a fraction, relief mixing with confusion. "You don't look angry," she said cautiously. "I'm not," he replied, and realized it was true. His eyes drifted back to Indy, who was watching him with quiet curiosity. "That's a nice elephant," he said, crouching down again. Indy hugged it tighter. "Her name's Stella." "That's a good name," Brennan said. "She looks brave." Indy smiled, small but proud. Brennan turned back to Sutton. "What did you buy?" She hesitated, then reached into her coat pocket and pulled out 2 folded receipts, smoothing them nervously before handing them to him. He scanned the first one. Children's winter coat, size 6. Waterproof boots, socks, underwear. Children's cold medicine, bandages, multivitamins, stuffed elephant, coloring book, crayons. Every item was for Indy. He swallowed and looked at the second receipt. Bread, peanut butter, granola bars, fruit, milk, juice boxes. At the bottom, a single line stopped him cold. Shelter Donation Fund, $100. He looked up sharply. You donated money? Sutton's cheeks flushed. The shelter on Mass Ave, they helped us when they could. They're always short on supplies. I thought if I had extra, even for one day. You're homeless, Brennan said quietly, and you gave money away? She shrugged, eyes dropping. There are women there with babies, teenagers, people worse off than us. The words hit him harder than the receipts. For years, Brennan believed desperation stripped people down to selfishness, that survival erased generosity. And here was a woman who had been sleeping on subway floors for 5 months, choosing to give. You didn't buy anything for yourself, he said. Sutton shook her head. Indy comes first. She always comes first. Brennan looked at the little girl, now coloring fiercely in a fresh book, tongue peeking out in concentration. A child who should have been worried about homework and birthday parties, not staying warm underground. Come with me, Brennan said suddenly. Sutton stiffened. What? Both of you, he said. Please. Fear flashed across her face, the instinct to protect, to run. Where? She asked. Somewhere warm, somewhere safe. He hesitated, glancing down at Indy, then back up at him. I don't know you. I know, but I won't hurt you. There was a long pause. Then Sutton nodded once. He didn't take them to his penthouse. That felt like too much, too personal. Instead, he booked a corner suite at the Four Seasons overlooking the public garden. When Sutton stepped inside, she stopped just past the doorway, as if crossing another step would break something. This isn't real, she whispered. It's just a room, Brennan said gently. Indy ran ahead, touching everything with wonder. Mama, there's a bathtub, a big one. Sutton's eyes filled with tears. You can stay as long as you need, no conditions. She turned to him, voice trembling. Why are you doing this? He searched for an answer that wasn't rehearsed. Because yesterday, he said slowly, you were given more money than most people see in a lifetime, and you chose kindness. Sutton pressed a hand to her mouth. I'll come back tomorrow morning, Brennan said. We'll figure out next steps then. As he left the suite, he heard Indy laughing. That sound followed him all the way back to his car. And for the first time in years, Brennan Ashford felt something shift inside him. He'd crossed a line, and there was no going back. Brennan didn't sleep that night. Even back in his penthouse, surrounded by silence engineered to cost millions, his mind wouldn't slow down. He stood at the window long after midnight, watching the city lights blink like distant signals. Somewhere across town, Sutton and Indy were sleeping in clean sheets, in warmth, behind a locked door. The thought should have felt satisfying. Instead, it made him restless. He kept replaying the receipts in his head. The children's coat, the medicine, the shelter donation. None of it fit the story his father had drilled into him since childhood. Desperation makes thieves of everyone. His father had been wrong before. Brennan knew that. Wrong about emotions, wrong about empathy, wrong about how to speak to people without turning every conversation into a transaction. But this challenged something deeper, something foundational. At 2:14 a.m., Brennan gave up on sleep and started making phone calls. Not to his lawyers, not to his PR team, to people whose numbers he'd kept buried in his contacts for years. Social workers, housing advocates, directors of nonprofit organizations he'd funded once and forgotten. He didn't introduce himself as a billionaire. He introduced himself as someone who needed help. By morning, he had a list. Real options, not temporary fixes. Pathways. At 8:45 a.m., he stopped by a bakery near the hotel. Fresh pastries, hot coffee. He hesitated, then added a small box of butterfly-shaped cookies he saw behind the counter. When he knocked on the suite door, it opened slowly. Sutton stood there, hair still damp, wearing the same clothes as the day before, but cleaner now. Her posture was different, straighter, cautious, but no longer collapsed inward. Good morning, Brennan said. She smiled softly. Indy's awake. Indy peeked around the corner, Stella tucked under her arm. "Hi." "Morning," Brennan said, handing her the cookie box. These looked important. Her eyes widened. "Butterflies." She ran back to the table. They sat together while Indy colored and hummed to herself, the TV murmuring softly in the background. Brennan laid out the plan, slowly, deliberately, like he would in a boardroom, except this time the stakes weren't money, they were lives. There's a 2-bedroom apartment available in Dorchester, safe neighborhood, near a good elementary school. The first year's rent is covered, with a step-down plan so it transitions fully to you. Sutton stared at him, frozen. There's a workforce development program starting in 3 weeks, medical billing and coding, stable hours, good benefits. They'll take you. Her hands began to shake. Healthcare is covered, Brennan added, for both of you, and childcare options through the school. Tears slid silently down Sutton's face, dripping into her untouched coffee. "This isn't charity," Brennan said, hearing his own voice soften. "It's a foundation, a place to stand. Everything after that is you." "I don't know what to say," Sutton whispered. "You don't have to say anything," he replied. Indy looked up from her drawing. "Mama, is this where we live now?" Sutton swallowed hard. "Not yet, baby. But soon," Brennan said gently. That afternoon, Brennan left them to rest. He walked through the city instead of taking the car, past storefronts, past people who looked tired in ways he had never noticed before. For the first time, the city felt loud, human. 3 weeks later, he helped Sutton move. He carried boxes up 3 flights of stairs, ignoring the protests from his assistant and the strange looks from neighbors. Stella supervised seriously, placing Stella on every surface and declaring it approved. "This is our house," Indy announced proudly, arms spread wide. That night, after Indy fell asleep in her own bed for the first time, Sutton and Brennan stood in the small living room surrounded by unpacked boxes. "I keep waking to wake up, back on the floor at the station." "It's real," Brennan said. She nodded, then turned to face him. "Why did you choose us?" He hadn't planned an answer. "Because you didn't break," he said after a moment. "You had every reason to, and you didn't." Sutton wiped her eyes. "I didn't feel strong." "You don't have to feel strong, you just have to keep going." Months passed. Sutton thrived in the program, top of the class. Indy started first grade, coming home with drawings and stories and scraped knees from the playground. Brennan visited often, not with grand gestures, with groceries, help assembling furniture, sitting on the floor during homework time. He noticed changes in himself, too. He stopped staying late at the office. He ate more meals at the small kitchen table in Sutton's apartment than in 5-star restaurants. He laughed more, real laughter, the kind that surprised him when it escaped. One evening, Sutton handed him something carefully, the credit card. "I kept it," she admitted. "I was scared if I gave it back, everything would disappear." Brennan closed her fingers around it again. "Emergency fund, for Indy, for peace of mind." She laughed through tears. "You really trust me?" "I do." But trust, Brennan was learning, changes things. It changes priorities. It changes the way people look at you. The board noticed. Questions started surfacing, gentle at first, then sharper. Comments about distractions, about focus, about risk. One night, alone in his penthouse again, Brennan stared out at the city and felt the familiar pressure return. He'd stepped outside the role he was supposed to play, and roles, once abandoned, rarely forgive you. Somewhere between the subway station and this quiet apartment, Brennan Ashford had crossed an invisible line. The problem was, he wasn't sure yet what it was going to cost him. The first warning didn't come as a threat. It came as concern. An email marked confidential, sent late on a Tuesday night, from a senior investor Brennan had known for more than a decade. The tone was polite, careful, almost friendly. "We've noticed some shifts in your availability and decision-making cadence. Just wanted to check in." Brennan read it twice, then closed his laptop without replying. He knew what it meant. When you reached his level, people didn't confront you directly. They framed pressure as curiosity, disapproval as advice, control as protection. He'd played that game for years, but now, for the first time, he wasn't sure he wanted to play it at all. Over the next few weeks, the questions multiplied. Why was he skipping late-night dinners with donors? Why was he delegating investor calls he used to insist on handling personally? Why had he started turning down speaking engagements? None of it was framed as criticism, not yet, but the message underneath was clear. You're drifting, and drifting was dangerous. Brennan noticed the contrast most clearly on Thursday evenings. That was when he usually stopped by Sutton's apartment. Nothing dramatic, no announcements, just groceries under one arm, maybe a book for Indy, sometimes nothing at all. He liked the quiet of it. Indy would spread her homework across the kitchen table, narrating her day with the seriousness of someone reporting breaking news. Sutton would cook something simple, pasta, soup, food that smelled like home instead of presentation. It was ordinary, and Brennan found himself craving it. One night, as Indy worked on spelling words, Sutton leaned against the counter and watched him quietly. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded automatically, then paused. "I don't know," he said. She didn't press. She never did. That was one of the things he admired most about her. She knew when to listen without trying to fix. At work, no one did that. The next board meeting made the shift impossible to ignore. The agenda was normal: financials, projections, regulatory updates. Then, near the end, someone cleared their throat. "We should discuss leadership focus," a board member said, folding his hands. "There's been some concern." Brennan leaned back slightly. "Concern about what?" "About visibility," another voice added, "and risk." "Risk?" Brennan repeated. "You've been involved in initiatives outside the company, philanthropic, personal. That's admirable. But at this scale, perception matters." There it was. He waited. "We just want to ensure your priorities remain aligned with shareholder interests," someone else said. "This company can't afford distractions." Distractions. Brennan felt something tighten in his chest. Not anger, recognition. For years, he had accepted that word without question. Anything not tied directly to growth was a distraction. People, relationships, meaning. He'd believed it. Now he wasn't sure he could anymore. "My priorities haven't changed," Brennan said evenly. A pause. "With respect," the first man replied. "They clearly have." After the meeting, his assistant walked beside him in silence until the elevator doors closed. "They're nervous," she said finally. "This is new for them." "It's new for me too," Brennan said. That night, alone in his penthouse, the silence felt heavier than usual. He poured a drink he didn't want and stood at the window watching the city move below. Somewhere down there, Sutton was probably helping Indy pack her lunch, worrying about spelling tests, normal things, things he'd never learned how to value before. His phone buzzed. A text from Sutton. "Indy lost her first tooth today. She says it doesn't hurt at all and wants the tooth fairy to bring a butterfly." Brennan smiled beside himself. Then the other phone buzzed. An email. This one less gentle. "We need to talk about boundaries." He closed his eyes. For the first time in his career, Brennan Ashford was being asked to choose, not between companies, between versions of himself. The weeks that followed made the choice sharper. An investor dinner he skipped was mentioned in a trade column. A delayed response was framed as disengagement. Whispers started. Nothing public, nothing explosive, just enough pressure to remind him who the system was built for and who it wasn't. One evening, Sutton noticed him staring off mid-conversation. "You're somewhere else," she said. He hesitated, then told her the truth. About the board, about the concerns, about the word distraction. She listened quietly, arms folded, eyes steady. When he finished, she spoke softly. "They're afraid you'll change." "Yes," Brennan said, "and they're not wrong." Sutton nodded slowly. "You already have." He exhaled. I don't know how to be both. Maybe you don't have to be, Sutton said. The simplicity of it stunned him. That night, he walked home instead of taking the car. He passed the station, the exact spot where Sutton had once sat, clutching Indy against the cold. Someone else sat there now. Different face, same cardboard sign. Brennan stopped. Not to intervene, not to fix, just to look. And in that moment, he understood something he hadn't before. You can't unsee humanity once it becomes personal. You can't go back to pretending it's abstract. The board wanted the old Brennan, the one who kept his distance, the one who believed people were risks to be managed. But that man no longer existed. The problem was, the world he'd built still expected him to be, and Brennan knew, deep down, that the next step he took wouldn't just define his career, it would define what this change was actually worth. Because if he chose comfort now, everything else would have been temporary, and he wasn't sure he could live with that. The breaking point didn't arrive with a headline. It arrived quietly, disguised as routine. Brennan was halfway through a quarterly review when his assistant slipped a folder onto the table. No comment, no eye contact, just a small nod that told him this wasn't normal. He finished the sentence he was speaking, closed his laptop, and opened the folder. Inside was a memo. Not from the board, from legal. The language was careful, sanitized, but the message underneath was blunt. Certain investors were requesting formal clarification of Brennan's role going forward. They wanted safeguards, oversight, boundaries around external initiatives, a review of leadership continuity. They were preparing for a future without him. Brennan felt his pulse slow instead of spike. That surprised him. For years, the idea of losing control had terrified him. Control was survival. Control was identity. Now, what unsettled him wasn't the possibility of stepping down. It was the realization that part of him felt relieved. He excused himself from the meeting early. No one stopped him. That night, he didn't go home. He drove straight to Sutton's apartment. Indy answered the door, missing tooth proudly on display. "Look," she said, pointing. "The fairy came." "Impressive," Brennan said, kneeling to her level. "Butterflies?" "She knew," Indy said, seriously. Sutton watched from the kitchen, concern already etched across her face. "You okay?" she asked, once Indy ran off. Brennan shook his head. "I think I'm about to lose my job." Sutton didn't gasp, didn't panic. She set down the dish she was drying and sat across from him at the table. "Tell me," she said. So he did. About the memo, about the pressure, about the unspoken ultimatum. "They don't want this version of me," he finished, "and they have the power to force the issue." Sutton listened quietly, hands folded. When he stopped talking, she didn't rush to reassure him. She asked one question instead. "If they succeed," she said gently, "what do you lose?" Brennan opened his mouth, then closed it. He thought of the penthouse, the title, the deference. Then he thought of grocery runs, homework nights, the sound of Indy laughing in the bathtub at the hotel, discovering warmth like it was magic. "I lose status," he said, finally. "And what do you keep?" Sutton asked. He didn't answer right away. "Your values don't disappear if your title does. They just stop being theoretical." That landed harder than the memo had. Later that night, after Indy fell asleep, Brennan stood alone on the apartment balcony, staring out at the quiet street. He realized something with startling clarity. For the first time in his life, the thing he was afraid of losing wasn't money. It was alignment. The next board meeting was called sooner than expected. Emergency session. Brennan knew what that meant. He walked into the room calm, composed, wearing the same suit he always did, but something inside him had shifted. They spoke carefully at first, then more directly. Concerns about optics, concerns about focus, concerns about leadership stability. Finally, the offer. A transition plan. Graceful, generous, framed as mutual. He listened without interrupting. When they finished, the room waited. Brennan took a breath. I won't step away from what matters to me. Not quietly, not slowly, not as a compromise. A ripple moved through the room. This company was built on innovation, he continued, on the idea that systems can change, that people can do better. If that stops at the edge of profit, then we were never honest about our mission. Silence. You're asking me to choose between leadership and humanity. I'm choosing both, but not on your terms. Someone leaned forward. You're risking everything. Brennan nodded. I know. The vote came faster than he expected. The decision was clean, official. Brennan Ashford would step down as CEO within 60 days. The news didn't break immediately, but the shock hit him anyway. Not grief, not rage, a strange, hollow quiet. That evening, Brennan didn't go to the penthouse. He went back to Sutton's. She didn't ask questions when she saw his face, just poured 2 cups of tea and sat with him. It's done, he said. Sutton nodded. How do you feel? He searched for the word. Lighter, he said. And then, unexpectedly, his voice broke. I built my entire life around a system that didn't make room for people like you. I defended it, benefited from it. I don't know what comes next. Sutton reached across the table and placed her hand over his. You'll figure it out. You always do, just not alone anymore. The next morning, the headlines came. Speculation, analysis, think pieces. Some called him reckless, others called him naive, a few called him brave. Brennan didn't read them. He was too busy in a small conference room downtown, sitting with social workers, nonprofit leaders, housing advocates, people who had been doing the work quietly for decades. He listened, he learned, and then he spoke. I don't want a foundation that looks good. I want one that actually works. That was the moment the idea stopped being personal and started becoming something larger. But not everyone was celebrating. Emails poured in, warnings, threats of reputational damage, predictions of failure. Brennan felt the weight of it all settle in. He had stepped off the path. There was no safety net, no guarantee. And as he walked past the station again that evening, he saw a mother sitting against the wall, holding a child too tightly against the cold. The world hadn't changed yet, and Brennan realized the real test was still ahead. Because now it wasn't just about belief, it was about whether he could build something that lasted, something that didn't depend on him alone, something that would still stand when the headlines faded. And he wasn't sure yet if he was ready for what that would require. The first office of the foundation was smaller than Brennan expected. No glass walls, no skyline view, just 3 cramped rooms above a community center in Roxbury, with mismatched chairs and a coffee machine that hissed louder than it worked. The paint on the walls was chipped. The carpet smelled faintly of cleaning solution and old paper. And yet, Brennan felt more nervous walking into that space than he ever had entering a boardroom. Because here, his name didn't carry the same weight. Here, people didn't care what he used to be. They cared about whether he would listen. The first meeting lasted 4 hours. Social workers spoke bluntly. Housing advocates interrupted each other. A woman who had run an emergency shelter for 20 years leaned forward and said, "If this turns into another vanity project, I'm out." No one looked impressed. No one looked grateful. Brennan nodded and took notes. For the first time in his life, he wasn't the smartest person in the room, and instead of threatening him, it grounded him. He learned quickly how little he actually knew, how intake forms alone could break people, how waiting lists crushed hope, how temporary assistance often became a slow, humiliating treadmill. He also learned how fragile trust was, especially when it came from someone like him. "You'll get tired," one man told him flatly during a break. "They all do." "I won't," Brennan said instinctively. The man didn't argue. He just looked at him, measuring. That night, Brennan sat alone in his penthouse one of the last times. Most of the rooms were already empty, art wrapped, furniture gone. He was downsizing, simplifying, letting go. He stared at the city and felt something he hadn't anticipated. Fear. Not of losing wealth, of failing people who had already been failed too many times. The foundation launched quietly. No press conference, no donors gala, just a phone number that worked, case managers with authority to say yes, apartments secured before paperwork, childcare arranged without months of delay. And slowly, word spread. Not through media, through people. Single parents showed up wary, shoulders tight, expecting rejection. Some left in tears, some in silence. Some didn't believe it until keys were placed in their hands. Brennan watched it unfold from the background. He insisted on that. He didn't want to be the face. He wanted the work to survive him. Sutton joined the foundation advisory board reluctantly. "I'm not qualified," she said. "You're the most qualified person here," Brennan replied. She brought something none of the experts could: memory. She knew which questions hurt, which ones mattered, which systems quietly punished honesty. Staff began seeking her out, listening, trusting her. Brennan noticed something else, too: resistance. Not from the people they helped, from institutions. Landlords who suddenly became unavailable, programs that stopped returning calls, funding channels that stalled. He recognized the pattern immediately. This wasn't chaos, it was pushback. One afternoon, Brennan received a call from a former colleague, off the record. "You're making people uncomfortable," the voice said. "That's not illegal," Brennan replied. "No," the man said, "but it's dangerous." The foundation had disrupted a balance. It was helping too efficiently, without bureaucracy, without permission, and that threatened systems built on control. The first real crisis came 6 months in. A funding partner pulled out without warning. No explanation, just an email citing strategic realignment. The gap was massive, enough to shut down half their housing placements. Staff gathered in the small office, tense and quiet. Sutton sat at the table, hands folded. "This isn't a glitch. This is a test." Brennan knew she was right. He'd seen this playbook before. Starve the problem until it collapses quietly. For the first time since stepping down, Brennan felt the old instinct rise, the urge to dominate, to leverage, to apply pressure. He could still make calls, still force outcomes, but doing so would tie the foundation back to him, and that was exactly what he was trying to avoid. If this depended on his power, it would die when that power faded. That night, he didn't sleep. He walked the city again, past shelters, past stations, past people still waiting for help. He stopped outside Back Bay Station without realizing it. The same tile, the same draft, different faces. He remembered Sutton there, how close he'd come to walking past. If he'd done that, none of this would exist. By morning, he made a decision, one that terrified him more than stepping down ever had. He would step forward publicly, not as a billionaire, as someone accountable. He scheduled a press briefing, not to announce success, to expose obstacles. The reaction was immediate. Some praised him, others accused him of manipulation. Former allies criticized him openly. Donors hesitated. But something else happened too. Small contributions began arriving: $5, $10, notes attached. "You helped my sister. I was one of those kids. Don't stop." The foundation stabilized, barely, enough to keep going. But Brennan knew the margin was thin, too thin. One wrong move and everything would collapse. One scandal, one mistake, one loss of trust. And as he stood in the foundation office late one evening, lights off except for his desk lamp, he realized something unsettling. This work required more than money, more than intention. It required endurance. And endurance meant letting go of control in ways he wasn't sure he knew how to do yet. Sutton stood in the doorway, coat on. "You coming?" she asked. "In a minute," he said. She hesitated. "You okay?" He nodded, then shook his head. "I don't know if this will survive me," he admitted. Sutton studied him quietly. "Then make sure it doesn't need you," she said. The words lingered after she left. Brennan sat alone, listening to the hum of the old building. The foundation was alive, but fragile, and the next test wouldn't be about belief or courage. It would be about whether he could finally step back far enough to let something better stand on its own, and he wasn't sure yet if he could. The call came on a Monday morning. No warning, no buildup. Just a number Brennan didn't recognize, flashing across his screen while he sat alone in the foundation office, staring at a whiteboard crowded with names, dates, and housing placements. He almost ignored it. Something told him not to. "Brennan Ashford?" he said. There was a pause on the other end, long enough to register. "This is Dana Keller," the woman said. "Office of the Attorney General." The room seemed to shrink. "Yes," Brennan replied carefully. "We're reviewing a complaint involving the Ashford Foundation for Family Stability," Keller continued. Her tone was neutral, professional, not hostile, not friendly. Brennan leaned back in his chair. "What kind of complaint?" "Misuse of influence," she said. "Preferential access, circumvention of standard procedures." Brennan closed his eyes for half a second. Here it was. "Is this a formal investigation?" he asked. "Not yet," Keller said, "but it could become one, depending on what we find." After the call ended, Brennan didn't move. He'd known resistance would come, pushback, pressure, quiet obstruction. But this was different. This had teeth. Within hours, the staff knew something was wrong. They always did. Sutton found him in the conference room, standing at the window, phone still in his hand. "Talk to me," she said. He told her everything. She didn't interrupt, didn't panic. When he finished, she sat down slowly. "This is what they do," she said. "When something doesn't fit the system, they try to slow it down until people give up." "I don't think this is about slowing us down," Brennan said. "I think it's about stopping us." The next week was brutal. Requests for documents, interviews, reviews of every placement, every decision. Staff grew anxious. Case managers worried that families would be pulled back into limbo. One mother called in tears, terrified she'd lose her apartment. Brennan reassured her, then sat in his car afterward, hands shaking on the steering wheel. This wasn't theoretical anymore. Real people could get hurt. The media caught the scent quickly. Articles appeared with cautious headlines. Questions raised about billionaire-led charity. Is compassion skipping due process? Comment sections filled with suspicion. Some defended the foundation. Others accused Brennan of saviorism, control, ego. He read everything. He hated himself for it. One evening, Sutton knocked on his office door after everyone else had gone. "You're spiraling," she said gently. "I might be destroying this," Brennan replied. She shook her head. "No, you're learning where the fault lines are." He laughed bitterly. "That's comforting." "Listen," Sutton said, sitting across from him. "This was never going to be clean. You know that. The question isn't whether they come after you, it's what you do when they do. What if the foundation collapses? What if people lose housing because of me?" Sutton leaned forward. "Then we protect the people first, even if it costs us everything else." The words settled heavily between them. 2 days later, Brennan made the hardest decision since stepping down as CEO. He recused himself, publicly. He released a statement announcing he would temporarily step back from operational control of the foundation while the review was underway. No drama, no blame, full cooperation. The reaction was immediate. Some praised the move as responsible. Others smelled blood. Donations dipped. Staff morale wavered. And Brennan, for the first time since this all began, felt truly powerless. Weeks passed. Investigators interviewed staff, reviewed policies, dug into emails. Brennan answered every question. He didn't defend himself aggressively. He told the truth. About the credit card, about Sutton, about why the foundation existed. One investigator asked him bluntly, "Do you understand why people are skeptical?" "Yes," Brennan said. "I was one of them." That answer stayed with him. During that time, Sutton took on more responsibility. So did others. Systems tightened, processes clarified, the foundation adapted. Brennan watched from the sidelines, restless but learning, and something unexpected happened. It kept working. Not perfectly, not easily, but it didn't fall apart without him. Families continued to move into housing, children stayed in school, lives stabilized. One afternoon, Brennan stood outside the building, watching Sutton help a new mother sign paperwork, explaining things patiently, remembering how terrifying forms could feel when everything else was unstable. He felt a strange mix of pride and grief. This was what he'd wanted, and it meant he was becoming less necessary. The investigation concluded quietly. No charges, no formal action, just a report recommending clearer governance and reduced founder involvement. It should have felt like relief. Instead, Brennan felt hollow. He met Sutton for coffee that evening. "I think this is it." "For what?" she asked. "For me," he said. "Here. I think the foundation needs to move forward without me at the center." She studied him for a long moment. "Are you sure this isn't just fear talking?" she asked. He hesitated. "No, this is trust." Sutton smiled sadly. "You've come a long way." "So have you," Brennan said. He walked home that night through streets he knew by heart now, past the station, past the community center, past the office where everything had begun. The foundation would survive. That was clear now. The question that remained was simpler and harder. Who was Brennan Ashford when he was no longer needed to prove anything? And what came next when the role that had defined his redemption was no longer his to play? The answer wasn't waiting for him, but for the first time, he wasn't afraid to keep walking until he found it. 2 years later, Brennan stood at the back of a crowded auditorium and kept his hands in his pockets so no one would notice they were shaking. The banner above the stage read, "Ashford Foundation for Family Stability, Annual Community Report." His name was still there, but smaller now. Not centered, not leading, and that was intentional. He watched as Sutton walked to the podium. She wore a simple blue dress, nothing expensive, nothing symbolic, just herself, confident, grounded, unafraid. The woman stepping onto that stage was not the same woman he had met on a freezing subway floor, and that was the point. Applause filled the room, long, earnest, not polite. Sutton waited for it to die down before speaking. "When I first came to this foundation," she said, voice steady, "I didn't think I belonged in rooms like this. I thought help always came with strings, that safety was temporary, that dignity was something you earned back later if you were lucky." Brennan swallowed. She continued, "What we learned is simple. People don't need to be fixed. They need stability. They need time. They need someone to say yes before they break." Heads nodded throughout the room. Social workers, case managers, families who had once slept in cars or shelters, now sitting upright, children beside them. Brennan spotted Indy in the third row, legs swinging, Stella the elephant tucked under her arm. Taller now, louder, unmistakably at home in the world. Sutton finished to a standing ovation. Brennan didn't clap right away. He just watched, because for the first time, the story no longer centered on him at all. After the event, people gathered in clusters. Conversations overlapped. Laughter, relief, familiarity. No one rushed Brennan, and that was new. Sutton found him near the exit. "You stayed," she said. "I wanted to see it, all of it." She smiled. "You did this." "No," Brennan said gently. "I started something. You built it." They stood in silence for a moment. Then Sutton spoke again, quieter this time. "I'm moving on next month." Brennan turned to her. "Moving on?" "Not leaving the foundation," she clarified, "but stepping out of day-to-day operations. I've been accepted into a policy program, public administration." He felt a familiar tightness of his chest. Not fear, recognition. "That's incredible," he said. "It's time," she replied. "This work shouldn't depend on people who were once saved by it. It should be run by people trained to scale it, sustain it." Brennan nodded slowly. "You taught me that," she added. They both knew what this moment meant. Not an ending, a release. Later that evening, Brennan walked Indy home with Sutton, holding the door open while Indy insisted on explaining every detail of her school science project. Butterflies again. Metamorphosis. Change. At the apartment door, Indy hugged him tightly. "You coming to my recital next week?" she asked. "I wouldn't miss it," Brennan said. As he walked back alone, the city felt different than it once had. Not smaller, just clearer. He passed Back Bay Station without stopping this time, not because it didn't matter, but because he didn't need to return to that moment anymore. He had already carried it forward. That night, Brennan sat in his modest apartment, far from the penthouse he no longer owned, and opened a drawer. Inside was the black credit card. The same one. He hadn't touched it in years. He turned it over in his hands, remembering how it had felt to pass it across cold tile, how reckless it had seemed, how controlled he thought the experiment was. He smiled softly. It hadn't been an experiment. It had been a confession. He slipped the card back into the drawer and closed it. The foundation didn't need it anymore, and neither did he. Months later, Brennan sat in the audience of a small elementary school auditorium, clapping as Indy and her classmates finished a shaky, off-key song. She beamed from the stage, searching the crowd until she found him. She waved. He waved back. Sutton caught his eye from the side aisle and smiled. Not with gratitude, with equality. After the recital, Brennan stood outside under the fading evening light and realized something quietly, without ceremony. He no longer needed redemption. He wasn't proving anything. He had simply become someone who stopped walking, someone who stayed, someone who learned that wealth could open a door, but presence was what kept it open. And as the crowd dispersed and the city settled into its ordinary rhythm, Brennan Ashford understood the final truth his father had never taught him. Trust wasn't weakness. It was responsibility, and once you accepted it, your life stopped being about what you could protect and started being about what you were willing to build, even if it no longer belonged to you. The cold January morning that had changed everything felt far away now, but its echo was still there, in the quiet stability of an apartment that once didn't exist, in a little girl who believed butterflies meant change was possible, in a man who finally understood that stopping mattered more than arriving. Brennan never talked about that day anymore. He didn't need to. The story lived on in the people who no longer slept on floors, in systems that bent just slightly toward dignity, in moments that didn't make headlines but made lives survivable. Some stories don't ask to be shared loudly. They stay with you. They surface later in quiet moments when you notice someone else and choose not to walk past. And if stories like this tend to linger with you, there will be more waiting here when you're ready.